an old Brisbane protester, like John is, and really appreciate your efforts. Look forward to hearing about it. Thanks so much for being here. And we've got two journalists, you know, independent media journalists, to ask the questions of these two. John Jenkins, who's been a big part of this, works for 4ZZZ, The Good Times, Bay FM, been an activist since you were born pretty much, eh, John? Thanks very much for getting this together and being here tonight. And the fourth chair, is Kitty Van Vuren, who is here, who I've not gone to know of, but she's, you know, CWA, we just saw how extraordinary they are. She's one of their pillars, and working for the Good Times, MFM. She's into the journalism thing. We need good journalists. Yeah. I'm leaving it to these guys. And then after they've drilled them, you get to ask your questions, okay?
Welcome to this interview with John Shipton and Cairen O'Reilly about their friend and son Julian Assange and the fate that is currently being played out for him in the UK. To begin with, Cairen, as a reporter I'm going to ask you three devil advocate questions. Firstly, after WikiLeaks informant Chelsea Manning was charged with providing WikiLeaks with a huge dossier on illegal war crimes, some reporters claim that WikiLeaks did not provide financial support towards Manning's legal costs. Is that claim true?
Yeah, I think it's great that we started with the acknowledgement of country, and also I think we have to acknowledge that the war against Indigenous people in this country has not ended, and that's what is good. And also acknowledge that the war that this country has been part of against the people of Iraq has not ended, and that's really, you know, when both Chelsea and Julian entered jeopardy, it was in some ways a choice that we are born in this, many of us, in the centre of empire. The Iraqi people obviously had this war imposed on them. And I just coincidentally happened to be at the Pentagon on Hiroshima Day 1990 when this war started, and that's when Margaret Thatcher was also there with George Bush Sr. announced the sanctions on Iraq, which was followed by the first Gulf War, and that's when Julian gets in trouble as a 17-year-old cyber activist before the World Wide Web and making his contribution to trying to stop the war machine, and that's when myself, Moana Cole, and two Americans were arrested disabling a B-52 bomber in upstate New York and went to prison. At that point, Chelsea Manning's about 3 years of age when this war starts, and the bombing was begun by 8 B-52s that took off from Louisiana. B-52s dropped 30% of everything that was dropped in the form of napalm, cluster bombs and fuel air explosives. And they dropped equivalent of 8 Hiroshimas over Iraq. But what followed the war, although the anti-war movement was smashed, the war continued through the 90s with the genocidal sanctions that the Australian Navy played a part in. And you know, the biggest contribution we make to war is Pine Gap, which is a word that you never hear in Australian media. And that killed 1 million children and destroyed civil society in Iraq. So in 2003, when the war moves from sanctions to invasion and occupation, Chelsea's about 14 years of age, living the mother in Wales after the parents are divorced, and speaking out against the war at high school. When she hits 17, she goes to live with her father and ends up homeless in the United States and joins the military. Meanwhile, Julian has started WikiLeaks in 2006, 3 years after the invasion. Myself and 4 others were arrested and charged with $2.5 million criminal damage to a US warplane in Shannon Airport, Ireland. So all this is happening. And when Chelsea's arrested in 2010, after getting into a chat room with the FBI informant Adrian Lamo, she is tortured in Baghdad and in Kuwait, and then in Quantico, Marine base. And at that point, we don't hear from Chelsea for 2 years until someone smuggles a recording device into a military hearing. And up to that point, they're throwing all sorts of shit at her, you know, and she can't defend herself. And that tape voice, we hear a coherent person, a moral person, a heroic person. And but in the beginning, the handful of us who were campaigning for her, we could not acknowledge that she, and WikiLeaks especially, it wasn't going to be helpful for them to say, yes, that's our person, that's our informant. So we would argue that she's been accused. And then when she had the court martial in 2013, she pled guilty and said, yes, it was me that blew the whistle. So in those early years, it wasn't wise for WikiLeaks to come up heavily in support, but they eventually did. There was a short circuit of solidarity, but it wasn't from Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. It was from the civilian peace movement for people who stepped beyond protest into non-violent resistance. And most of those people were members of the military, the US military and the British military. And I know from my own experience serving 13 months in jail for the B-52 in the States, that most resistance in that first Gulf War came out of the military. There were 200 members of the military who were sentenced to 6 months to 6 years, and they received very little solidarity from the millions who marched. And when you march, you incite people, whether it's people to do direct action, or whether it's members of the military not to fight an unjust war, or whether it's someone like Julian Assange to publish the truth. So there is a short circuit of solidarity, but it's not with Julian Assange, and you can clearly see that because Edward Snowden is not in chains today. The only reason Edward Snowden is not in American custody is because Sarah Harrison and Julian Assange rescued him in Hong Kong.
Secondly, Cairen, some commentators claim that WikiLeaks released emails from Hillary Clinton and gave the US presidential election of 2016 to Trump, and there's been a lot of, loss of support for Assange on that ground. What have you to say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a myth. If the book to read is a book called Shattered, about the Clinton campaign. It was just a very bad candidate who ran a very bad campaign. And I don't think any of us, including Donald Trump, thought he could win that election. If you see the recent Michael Moore documentary on that. WikiLeaks is committed to publishing the primary data they get, they didn't get anything significant on Trump. What they got on Hillary Clinton was that she rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders. And I think showing the internal corruption of how the Democrats were choosing their nominee, I think the big problem was that Sanders didn't run with that. I mean, Sanders didn't say, okay, it's been rigged, I'm going to run as an independent. And he hasn't in the last 4 years really spoken out in strong support of Julian, or WikiLeaks, who exposed the internal corruption that nominated his candidacy, which would probably have defeated Trump.
All right, well, this third question I'll address to both of you. Many people criticise Julian for not facing the sex assault allegations in Sweden. Can you explain why...
Bullshit!
Can you explain why Julian chose to breach his bail conditions and seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London? And John, do you want to answer this one first?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Yes, it was clear to Julian and his advisors that the United States would immediate. They have a thing called in Sweden called temporary surrender. You don't have to go through the usual process of extradition in temporary surrender. So it was very unwise for Julian to go to Sweden without guarantees that he wouldn't be refueled into the hands of the United States. Now, Julian fought 2 court cases in Sweden to get the prosecutor, Marianne Nye, to interview him. 2 court cases. The second court case at the appeals court ordered Marianne Nye to interview Julian to progress the case. At that time, after that, Marianne Nye still continued to prevaricate, but eventually the prosecutor went to the embassy and interviewed Julian. So in total there's 2 interviews, 4 prosecutors. The allegations were dumped 3 times over 9 years, ruining the judicial reputation of Sweden throughout the world. And now Sweden is sort of seen as a cranky country that sells junk furniture.
Yeah, I think the recent magistrate who's Abernathy remanded Julian into a Category A prison, saying that in the history of absconding, well, he's got a better history than I have in terms of turning up to court. And when the interview was leaked in the Swedish media, he went straight to a police station. He didn't try and do a runner. The senior prosecutor in Stockholm said there's no crime here, go on your way. Then he gets to England and they issue a European arrest warrant and he turns up at Kentish Town Police Station. But his position is, you've got to guarantee there'll be no forward extradition to the United States or come and interview me here. And, there's forever Australian cops going to England to interview people about matters that occurred here, and there's British cops who come here. But I don't think they ever had an intention to move this beyond an initial inquiry, and it was a holding action for the United States grand jury to get their act together. And now they've dropped it, and they're clearing the decks so the 17 espionage charges and the extradition to the United States can have a free run. So yeah, it's been interesting. The Italian journalists managed to get Crown Prosecution Service emails to the Swedish prosecution revealed, and one of them, the Brits, are actually saying to the Swedes who want to drop the whole thing, do not get cold feet, but do not come and interview him in the embassy. So the intentions were quite clear.
John, I've got a couple of questions about Julian's physical and mental state. And he's been, recently being moved to Belmarsh prison after spending a long time at the Ecuadorian embassy. And we're hearing disturbing reports about his physical and mental well-being. And I think those of us who've followed the story in the media can see that with our own eyes. So what can you tell us about how he is?
Julian's situation is dire. He hasn't had, reasonable attention hasn't had life-sustaining habits and life-sustaining opportunities now for 9 years. 9 years. Ceaseless persecution, increasing in intensity with a trajectory that aims to destroy. The details of which, if I recite them, I get a bit upset. But you can see that in that last court appearance that Julian made before Judge Barraza, he couldn't remember his name and couldn't know his birthday. Now, previous to that appearance, he'd been stripped, searched, and put in what the prisoners call a hot box. Philip Siegel, a Sydney barrister, and Greg Barnes, a Melbourne barrister, wrote, along with 10 other barristers, that in their whole career spanning 50 years of defending people, they're criminal law barristers, in their 50 years of defending people, they had never, ever seen a person brought before the court in that condition, ever. Usually the judge would say, well, he's not fit to plead today, take him away. Now, part of the due process has two elements. One is that the person has access, so can arm themselves to defend themselves, and that's with barrister and papers and so on, and be well enough to plead. That's part of due process. So, as you can see, due process is never followed in Julian's case. Ever. Ever.
So he's in Belmarsh prison at the moment, and we're kind of wondering about the conditions of incarceration. Some people have said that what he's going through at the moment amounts to torture. What's your response to that?
Well, in mine, it is torture. It's 22 hours a day, banged up by yourself, staring at the ceiling. Julian, in order to regain some stability of health and mentality, he asks us, how far is it from Madrid to Paris? How far is it from Madrid to Paris? And we tell him the answer, and he walks up and down his cell in a journey from Madrid to Paris, counting the footsteps. There's 3 metres. Counts them all up day by day, and so his journey is to Paris. When I go to meet him, they clear all the hallways. I don't know what this is for. Cairen will tell you. He's been in this place. They clear all the hallways and escort him down, a guard on either side, in these empty, black, echoing hallways into the meeting room. Above your head, there are high-fidelity cameras that enable lip reading if they want. And then every few metres, there's another camera, a general fidelity camera. In his cell, every 30 minutes somebody comes and opens the peephole and looks in, and then closes it up, all 24 hours a day. This circumstance is described by Niels Melzer as torture. And it's not by itself. So as I mentioned before, there's been 9 years of it in steadily increasing intensity. Our government knows this because we get the FOIs from our government. But they repeat like a mantra, I love Coca-Cola, due process, over and over again. And because we don't know what due process consists of, we swallow this hook. We think, oh, well, they're genuine. They're not genuine. Recently, Maurice Payne was at Senate estimates, and she was questioned by Rex Patrick, a senator from South Australia, a former All man. She replied that Julian had refused consular access that they had written 4 times. What had actually happened is that the prison didn't give him his mail for a number of months, and then gave him 500 letters to read. She also said, now she's got Niels Melzer's 36-page report. Niels Melzer's the UN rapporteur on special rapporteur on torture. She's got it because we extracted under an FOI from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And whenever you extract something on an FOI, it goes up on their site. So you can check. You can just go and check. Yes, they have Niels Melzer's report where he deconstructs thoroughly the rape allegation. Deconstructs it completely. She's read that, and yet at Senate estimates, she not only says rape allegation, but rape allegations. These people know no limit to their calumny. Anyway, that's a bit depressing for you, but that's the truth of the answer.
Julian does actually have the possibility of having his 50-week imprisonment reduced to 25, conditional upon not committing any further offences. What's happening with that? Is he likely to be released soon?
On the 26th of September, Julian stopped being a prisoner and became a remand man. That is, he went from up on the south. Anyway, no electricity. So yeah, he became a remand prisoner. He went from two visits a month for 2 hours to 3 visits a week. So it's a more comfortable circumstance in some regard. So he's a remand prisoner now.
Well, Julian faces extradition to the United States and possibly 175 years in prison if he's found guilty of all charges. What do you think is his greatest fear if that should come about?
I'm certain that for 9 years he's realised that if he goes to the United States, that's the end. He's fought for 9 years not to go to the United States. He's well aware that it means death. We are well aware of that, that's why we're here.
See?
Cairen, you've become famous for your non-violent anti-war protests, including defacing and disabling war aircraft. You served 12 months in prison in the US. What were your conditions like?
Pretty bad. I mean, I imagine there's other people in the room tonight who've been in custody, and Mark Palmer there and I were in custody together in our teenage years, which was 40 years ago, and we were bashed by the Queensland police. And we tried to get held to account, and they used every trick in the book. They started turning up at my mother's workplace and humiliating her. Like, when you're in custody, you're very, very vulnerable, and you probably are in hospital as well. You need, in both situations, you need advocates, really strong advocates, and to be visible. And Julian, there's been a conscious, methodic attack on Julian Assange's mental and physical health now for 9 years, and 7 years of that was sensory deprivation in the Ecuadorian embassy. And the last year of that, when I began to be present pretty much full-time outside the embassy, the Merino Ecuadorian government was just filling the place with more and more cameras and surveillance and all the stress associated with that. Boris Johnson spent £12 million on surrounding the embassy for 2.5 years with visible uniformed police. When I was living outside the embassy, there were special branch vehicles there 24/7, and the special branch were also located in an apartment directly opposite the embassy. So since right at the beginning, when he was taken to Hawkesbury courts, I remember running towards the court, and when I got there, there were like 100 people, and 95 of them were media. There were about 5 of us there in support. And he was taken, denied bail. They wanted him offline and put in Wandsworth prison. And he eventually got a very restricted bail where he had an electronic anklet and had to pay a huge amount of money and sign on a police station every day. But the next court appearance was at Woolwich Crown Court. And Woolwich Crown Court, there's no other court like it in the United Kingdom. It's a court built for terrorist cases. Primarily it was built for the Provisional Irish Republican Army in the 90s. And it's got a tunnel going underground into Belmarsh, which is a Category A. Now, Julian just served nearly a maximum sentence, it was 50 out of 52 weeks, the sentence, on a breach of bail, of which there was no charge. Now, bail is usually a means to an end, that is to get you to turn up to face a charge, but there was no charge. So he just served the maximum sentence on a ridiculous breach of bail. I mean, I've breached bail in a variety of jurisdictions about 7 or 8 times, and it's just come back next week. It's usually not a big drama. So they are misusing the law, and within the prison itself, there's ways of... They took him out of general population where he seems to be doing quite well. He's a very social guy. He likes interacting with people. And they moved him to the medical wing and put him in solitary confinement. And when they moved him within the jail, they have what's called a controlled move, which is they clear all the wings. He doesn't meet anyone spontaneously walking the other way. So this is a very methodic... I mean, in my own case, I had the other extreme. I was arrested in upstate New York, and they put me on Con Air and they flew me to the Mexican border. And they put me in a bus into the outback, into a county jail called Pecos. And I was the only gringo, the only white boy in the prison. And there were 24 of us in a cage, and 6 cages welded together in one room. And in that room there were 3 guards. And whenever anything kicked off in terms of violence, the 3 guards fled. And you didn't see a prison officer for another 40 minutes when the riot squad came in. So it was very difficult. You know, the first month I was getting low-level assault and spat at and harassed by both the staff and young gang members. And what literally saved my ass and saved me in that situation was the amount of correspondence I received, the amount of support mail. As soon as that started coming in, the staff, and many of them were ex-members of the military or serving National Guard, backed off me immediately. As soon as they saw I had reach on the outside of contact. And that's why I encourage everyone to write to Julian while he's in prison. Yeah, I mean, I think I came out of that a very different person. I probably had PTSD. I was very, you know, a high state of threat. And I think Julian has come out of that embassy a very different person, will come out of prison a very different person. And it's just as my godson, Ben Griffin, who was in the Paras and the British SAS in Afghanistan and Iraq, probably came back from those situations a very different person. So, you know, when we march against war, we implicitly incite people to resist it non-violently. We incite members of the military to non-cooperate, like Chelsea Manning, and we incite journalists to write about it and tell us the truth, you know. And someone like Greg Shackleton, the 005, paid with their lives trying to tell us about the war in East Timor. And Julian has paid with his liberty, which is only the second gift to your life that you have, to sacrifice your liberty.
What's
I think
first?
we're a movement. We need to accompany anyone we incite through the consequences of that.
As a former prisoner, you talk about the importance of a release date. Why is a release date important to a prisoner?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably speaking as a future prisoner as well, given the state of the world, you know. And yeah, the most important thing to a prisoner is a release date, even if there is no release date, even if you're doing life. And you know, Julian has never had a release date, and he doesn't know if this will end or when it will end. And as he has said, like, since March 2018, he's become largely invisible. That's when the collaborationist Ecuadorian president switched off the internet and cancelled visits for a period. And he said that he hasn't got the ability to defend himself or his friends or other people now. I mean, he had incredible gifts, you know, that he could have easily turned those gifts into commodities and been a multimillionaire poolside in Silicon Valley now. And no one could argue with that. But he used those gifts in solidarity with the poor and the oppressed and the bombed. And Chelsea Manning has used her gifts in a similar way. And that's why they're in prison, you know. Because all it's asked from us for wars to happen now, it's not like Vietnam where they want their firstborn son, or in World War II rationing, or in World War I everyone's supporting it. All they ask for us now is to look the other way, to avert our gaze. And if Chelsea Manning had done that, it wouldn't be a job.
John, you've just returned from a tour of Europe, and now that you're back in Australia, there have been several developments in terms of support for Julian, not least of all the country's 4th largest petition, and still growing, started by Philip Adams, that's you there. And there's also public support from well-respected journalists such as ABC presenter Cairen O'Reilly, and an open letter to Scott Morrison from the previously detained filmmaker James Ricketson. How does Julian reconcile the fact that The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times, The Sydney Morning Herald and others all published his material and profited from it, but have not faced any legal repercussions?
Thank you. Back in the bunker, John Goetz and Mark Davis did an SBS film. He's put together the excess films that didn't use in a small film. It's not public yet, but it will be soon. The Guardian and the New York Times and the Spiegel conspired together to get Julian and WikiLeaks to publish first, so that WikiLeaks and Julian would take all the ire and anger that the United States would direct at them if they published first. But this went wrong for them, because on Friday, Julian stayed up all night, 24 hours, continually redacting names. 10,000 names were redacted. This didn't give him time to put the finishing, to finish the website. The website wasn't finished till Tuesday. So the New York Times and the Spiegel and the Guardian published first. They're the first to publish. The next thing, the next thing is that the contract signed by the Guardian required the Guardian not to publish the passphrase and not to give the passphrase to the New York Times, and one other element in the contract that I've forgotten. All 3 elements were disobeyed by the Guardian. They were ignored. And the Guardian, under Nick Davies, stood and gave calumnies to Julian that he was cowardly. The fact was that on Friday night they went out for a beer making hangman's jokes, which are all on film, and Julian stayed back all night and all the next day redacting names. Now with Philip Adams' petition, huge petition, there's another phenomena which you will very much like to hear about. Within that petition, the Assange campaign.org.au has set up an app which is 3 steps to write a letter to every parliamentarian in Australia, but in particular your parliamentarian. So you put in your postcode and your local will come up. Then you have the choice of 2 letters. One is that your local member is a supporter, the other is that he is unsympathetic. So you choose the 2 letters and click, and that letter goes to the parliamentarian. 25,000 in the last 48 hours. 25,000. That's the 270, parliamentarians. Now, what's interesting in that is that of the 250, Philip tells me about 150 are Australians. 25,000 in 150 is a phenomenal result in a mail out, unheard of. A fabulous result is 15%. A great result is 10 to 12%. Ordinarily, you expect 8%. So it indicates to you that the tide has turned. The sentiment is historically moving in our favour. And that phenomenon emerges from within us. And we can only see it. They hide it from us. They won't publish it. But we can see it in the phenomena of the huge numbers of people who take up the opportunity to write to them. Now, people argue that, you know, an email is not so effective as this, that and the other. Okay, I can accept that. But as a general phenomena indicating the turn of the tide, 25,000 out of 150 is just fabulous.
Okay, I've got one more question for you in relation to journalists and their attitude, I suppose, towards Julian. Peter Grester, who himself has been jailed in Egypt a few years ago, has said that Julian is not a proper journalist and so should not be afforded the same rights and protections as other journalists.
Bullshit.
Having said that, and I've just recently read another article in Bloomberg which kind of suggested that at times he is a journalist and at other times he's not a journalist. He has, however, won quite a few awards: the Economist New Media Award, the Amnesty New Media Award, the Sydney Peace Foundation Gold Medal, the Voltaire Award for Free Speech, the Brazilian Press Association Human Rights Award, and the Walkley Award for Most Outstanding Contribution to Journalism, and that's an Australian award. So, what do you have to say to people like Peter Grester that suggests that he's not a proper journalist and therefore does not afford the same rights and protections?
Well, you know, if you want to help from people, you don't go around tipping a bucket of shit on them. So I don't want to say too much bad about Peter. But in England, they tell me that the Free Journalists Alliance and Peter Grester are fronts. They just say, oh, they're fronts. They're a front for something or other. They're front. They're organised anti-Julian, and you know, calling itself a free press alliance. They're just bullshitters. But Peter, I don't know why he did it, you know, it's clear. There's 16 awards that Julian's received for journalism. 16! That's not light, you know. Peter, I don't think got any. He got a ticket from Egypt back. He used to work for Al Jazeera, which is a, you know, well-known place for MI6 to manipulate the Arab nations. It's a mystery to me why he took the risk, and it's no mystery to me to see his reputation collapse completely as the power of the turn of the tide has swept the Sydney Freedom Alliance, Journalist Freedom Alliance, out of the way. It's just gone. Nobody takes any note. Oh, Peter, you know. So, and I don't mean that contemptuously of Peter, it's just that the historical moment has passed and another has emerged, and that moment is us. You can feel it within, I can feel it within myself as an old man, you know, stumble around the world rabbiting on about Julian and circumstances that have been imposed upon him. So all we ask from these governments, all we ask in one phrase, obey their own laws. Obey their own laws.
Now, one of the... I think the first time I interviewed you back in 2014, I asked you about all the awards that Julian had won, and asked you how proud you were to have him as a son. So this question is to both you and Cairen, but we'll start with you first. What is Julian like as a person, as a son, and for Cairen it will be, how did you find Julian as a friend?
I'm close to two boys, you know, Gabriel and Julian. Gabriel's 36, Julian's 48. Julian in the 9 years never complained once. Not once. Not even a hint of complaint. And Gabriel was the same. He got into a bit of trouble at university, you know, too much. Is that me, huh? And no complaint. Not a complaint. So that's a phenomenon of these men. Also they had Julian's sweet-natured, Gabriel's warm-natured. They're distinct. It's sweet. And you can see in those original, if you bring them to mind, into your mind, those original appearances back in 2011, 2012, before the pressure of being banged up all the time began to make him constantly serious. He's sweet-natured. What I mean by sweet is when you're in his company, he embraces you, you know, and draws you forward, you know. And also he doesn't like you to leave. So I'm often, you know, they say, John, this person has to leave at this time because Julian won't ever leave, and it goes on all night. So I'm often charged, you know, come in and say, oh, Julian needs to do this, that and the other and take them away because he doesn't like his suite. He doesn't want you to part, to leave. If he wants you, he's only ever once asked me to do something. Usually he uses subtlety and he leaves an opening there, you know. I just used to think to myself, why don't you just ask me? Why don't you just, you know, spit it out if you want me to start a political party? But no, leave the opening there, and then I'll fly him, I say, oh, well, okay, I'll have a go. But once has he asked me something, and that was in Belmarsh, when I first visited him in the 50 weeks jail time that he experienced. He said, will I come and live in the UK and speak to him? That's it. That's what he's like. Oh, could I add something, another dimension? I've told this story a few times now, and it is forgivable because it's good. When the Collateral Murder video was released, you know, you can bring to mind that those men walking along casually, 18 of them, then they're all dead, and then the children come and they're wounded, and the Good Samaritans, 2 Good Samaritans are murdered along with the wounded man. So 18 people. So Julian and Kristen's the current chief editor of the Leaks, lovely man. Julian and Kristen, in conference together, decided that Kristen would go to Cedar City. In every town in Australia, there'll be one here, there's a memorial, an obelisk usually, and there's the names of the dead. It's really important to human beings to have the rights of death. And if you die in war, you know, your name will be put somewhere or other on an obelisk. In the case of the Vietnam death for the Americans, they have a wall with 60,000 names on it. I don't know. So that's what we do. It's really important. It calls back our humanity. Commemoration of the dead. The dead need commemoration by us. We need to do that. It humanises us. So Kristen went to gain permission and went to Cedar City at danger of his own life. You remember back then Cedar City was a turmoil of bombs and car bombs. And interviewed the children of one of the murdered men. I think laptop and played collateral murder. They had no idea that their father and uncle, they just went out to work and never returned, nothing. Anyway, Julian and Kristen were able to name 2 of those things. The rest couldn't be found. They tried, but couldn't be found. Now, the dispatch officer for Reuters was an Australian. He lives in Tasmania. He's never ever recovered, you know, he's quite ill with depression, eating out of bed, and so on. Nice man. But I wish to illustrate the breadth. Julian I picked up a prize from May Reid Maguire in Dublin. This is a Peace Prize winner. She's about 18 now. Nice. So she called me over to Dublin and said, I picked up this prize on behalf of Julian at the European Parliament. I give it to you to hold in trust for Julian. That prize is for compassion in journalism. So that's what Julian did.
Julian gets listed in England on the 7th of December 2010 when this nightmare starts, and that was 9 years ago last weekend. And I remember running to the court that day, and this ironic kind of humorous thing came in my head. It was like, Queenslander, the state of origin, you know. I knew he was born in Townsville. But something deeper than that was that, although he was about 10 years younger than me, that he would have been formed with the backdrop of the Australian anti-war movement and anti-nuclear movement, and a real sense that he's one of ours, you know, and they've got him, you know. These institutions based in London, he's 12,000 miles from home, that framed the Guildford 4, that framed the Birmingham 6, that framed the Maguire 7. You know, miscarriages of justice are not rare in the British legal system. And just to think, you know, someone from the same place I come from, is in their hands, and I think we've really got to own him in that very kind of tribal sense. And any of our people, you know, if we have a serious anti-war movement, we're going to take prisoners, we're going to have prisoners, and we may take fatalities, you know, and we really have to own that. And you know, although Julie and I were part of the non-violent blockading of the World Economic Forum in Melbourne in 2000, which happened on September 11th, the year before New York got hit. I didn't really meet him until he got in trouble. And I remember Ben Griffin and I, the SAS veteran, travelling up to meet him to get this role of getting him into court and out of court. And I thought, you know, he's pretty busy, we'll do kind of 45 minutes or whatever. Anyway, we got there and sat down and started talking, and then it became 9 p.m. and I stood up and said, oh, I think we better go and get back to London. Then it became like 10 p.m. and then, like, the guy can talk, you know, and he's really interested in other people's experiences, and he really wants to learn. And, you know, I found him a very unpretentious Australian. Like in England, it's such a class-ridden culture. You're continually being sized up. Are you above me? Are you below me? You know, the whole status thing is really hardwired into their culture. Maybe it's getting more that way here, I'm not sure, but it wasn't when I was growing up. And there's something refreshingly Australian about him, in the best sense of that. You know, the Australians I met at Jabiluka, who I met blockading the World Economic Forum, are very kind of down to earth. I remember during that discussion, I think he was talking about the disingenuous nature of Guardian reporters. He jumped up from the couch and said, I'm an Australian, I'm not a fucking liar, you know? Yeah. And like, Australians do not tolerate bullshit, you know? And even the bad ones, you know, like in Britain, they'll piss on you and tell you it's raining. In Australia, they'll piss on you and give you a weather forecast for the next time they're going to piss on you. And, you know, they'll do away with their back. There's no kind of pretension. Even the bad Australians are very blunt and direct, you know. So, you know, I find him a very empathetic character, and how he's presented in the British media, I was saying to John in London that it's like Gollum out of Lord of the Rings. It's like they've hit him so hard, it's like this visceral reaction to the name, if you try and raise it, you know, and the other problem is the people admire him, many of them kind of treat him somewhat like some kind of hyper-intelligent life form from another planet. And I don't think either of those things are helpful. You know, I think to romanticise, say, Aboriginal people or Irish people or Timorese people is as racist as to demonise them. They're human beings, and Julian Assange is a human being who's been denied his humanity and his rights, and he's suffering, I believe, a slow-motion crucifixion, you know, a drip feed of slander and attack on his physical and mental health. And, you know, I find him a person with great self-depreciating humour, and someone who really cares for the world and convinced by his work, convinced by the significance of that work, and resilient, but he's not superhuman, and that's why he needs us to accompany him.
Okay, so I'm going to conflate a couple of questions because I realise that it's getting quite late. Many people applaud WikiLeaks' work because it shone a light on the activities of government and the surveillance state. And some of us would argue that that is immoral, if not illegal. Now, under the Obama administration, Assange was not considered, they were unable to find evidence that his actions differed from those of journalists. Meanwhile, with Julia Gillard, back in Australia, Assange was considered a criminal. And now, when Julian is perhaps facing extradition to the United States, we're finding that under Trump, he's no longer considered a journalist. And also the claim that his activities with WikiLeaks has put in jeopardy the security of individual agents and governments. And I think with the unfolding of the whole Trump saga, we're seeing sort of other relationships that are now coming to the surface. So where do you think this is going, and how can one draw the line under this?
Yeah, this is interesting that over the last 10 years, the United States has gone about they use the word reforming, but anyway, changing the extradition agreements between all of the countries that are allies. So that Australia, just a couple of years ago, changed its extradition procedures with the United States so that they're easy. This is, so the United States has a policy of intimidation, extradition of those like Julian, or extradition of those like the CEO of Hawaii, who have technical secrets. It's a policy. Wherever there's criticism or wherever there's plunder, they enact this policy. They just want to destroy. The only people that can resist this policy is us. We can insist that these policies aren't followed by our government. Well, that's where it's going. In Europe, in touring around Europe, the 7 countries that I visited, Italy, I see at the highest level of government people in Italy, and they've formed a cross-party modelled on the Australian cross-party. We got there first. But in Europe, they're very, very concerned because their publication, essentially, WikiLeaks, first registered in France, first of its court cases that had fought to be able to publish was in France. Julian, Le Monde was a major publisher of Julian, and so was Liberation. In Germany, Der Spiegel. In the UK, of course, as you know, The Guardian, The Telegraph, The Times. So it's essentially a repression of European publication, and they're very concerned. There's a cross-party group supporting Julian. In the European Parliament, there's a cross-party group supporting Julian in the German parliament. There's a cross-party group forming in the Greek parliament, the Spanish parliament and the French parliament. The French won't go very smoothly because the French are currently in revolution. They had 1.5 million people go on strike this week, and the Gilets Jaunes, they're supporters of ours. 120 of them come across, and they'll be there. Actually, George Christensen, Andrew Wilkie, Claire Daly, Nick Wallace, I can't remember all their names, forgive me, but all of these MPs will be there, and they'll be outside the court. The Gilets Jaunes will be there on the 24th of February. All the members of my family will be there. That might be a grim display, but they will be there. And just so in Europe, the matter is really serious, but they seem to have only caught on from us as it grows here over the last, I think it's, I went and saw Peter Wish-Wilson accompanied by Greg Barnes 2 years ago. And in 2 years, now it's up to 11 public signatories and 7 others private. And their voices just get stronger as ours get stronger. Every meeting I go to is full. It's not because of me. I've done nothing, you know. I've been retired for more than a week. So the essence of what's happening is in us, attending these meetings and discussing amongst ourselves and doubting the word of parliamentarians. And it's been in Queensland, it's been in Mullumbimby, it's been in Cologne, in Dusseldorf, in Stuttgart, in Stockholm, in Oslo, in Dublin, in London, in the UK, and Berlin. That's how I've been, and they're all strong. All strong like that.
Well, this is the final question from Kitty and me, and after that we're going to have a question and answer from the audience. So I'll ask the final question. What drives Julian? Why do you think he has a mission to shine a light on power? Do you think his mission is worth it? Does he?
Well, I think it is. You know, the gifts. You can't give gifts at that level and regret it. The gift to us is just enormous. You know, we know how they behave now. They report it to themselves. We know from the cables. Clinton Fernandez is the colonel at the Australian Defence Force Academy. He's written a book called What Uncle Sam Wants, examining what the United States wants from the cables. Essentially, they want what we've got. So we know who those that facilitate the United States amongst our community. I'll give you, I won't give Australian examples, but when Rafael Correa became president of Ecuador, he looked at the cables and saw that the elite of the Ecuadorian police were paid the extra money an elite force would get by the US Embassy. So their loyalty was to the US Embassy. Korea simply raised all the other officers, police officers, wages to the same level as the elites were being paid by the United States Embassy. So these are great insights, and if you want to know that there was a coup in Bolivia about a month ago, Evo Morales was chased away by the army. You can look up the cables, look at the names involved in forcing Evo out, and you'll see that their involvement with the United States and its embassy. You can judge. In the case of the Chagos, I'll make this quick. Sorry, in the case of the Chagos Islands, I've repeated this a number of times. they were in their entirety removed from their homes, the Chagos Islands, dumped in the Mauritius. Then one of the Chagos Islands was given over, it's called Diego Garcia, as a B-52 Air Force base. The Chagos Islanders were able, based on the cables, to take a case to the International Court of Justice and win against the United Kingdom. You wouldn't have been able to do that without the cables. In my humble view, Chelsea Manning, you know, I look at her and she has all the attributes of a saint. 7 years for that. 2 years torture. Undergoes a very difficult operation because she's decided, she's made a particular decision, and then is free, is called upon to rat on Julian and says, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Back in jail, in a male prison, I've got to tell you, in a male prison, by herself in the male prison for her own protection. They could have put her in a female prison, no. They put her in a male prison, but she gets to see no one. You know, these people are saints, such courage, such admiration in the heart, and they lead us on. But not only do they lead us on, but it seems, I've said this 3 times tonight, it seems as though the tide of history is propelling us upward after 10 years of horseshit. Well,
I remember thinking very early on in this 9-year journey thus far that Julian and Chelsea had bet their life's liberty on the assumption that if only we knew more, we'd do something, you know, about the war and about Afghanistan, about Iraq, about how the world is ordered. And I thought, that could be a false assumption. And the problem, I do believe the truth will set you free, you know, as the scripture tells us and others have told us. But it really, for us to respond, we're increasingly in an atomised culture and society where the state don't want you to be active citizens, they want you to be passive consumers who believe the only freedom is a choice between Pepsi and Coke at the point of consumption. And to break out of that and to sustain any resistance or any solidarity campaign, we need community and we need each other, and that's difficult. Even our little community on the road this week, because that requires continual forgiveness of each other and reconciliation. And what gets in the way of that is our pride and our fear. We're too proud to be forgiven, we're too fearful to forgive. And I think you're well placed in this setting of Nimbin to build community, much more than many of us in the bigger cities. And to have at that heart, you know, peace and justice and solidarity with other people in worse situations. And I think, you know, having spent a lot of time with Chelsea Manning's mum and aunts and uncles, I can see where she got her values from. You know, very working class Welsh family. And it was great to accompany them to Dublin and build a broader community with that family. And so, you know, even when they stuck me, you know, both in Pecos, Texas, and also when I was stuck in Hans Crescent, I didn't leave there for 100 days. The beloved community is in front of us. You know, I began to talk to people and relate to Harrods security guards, you know, who are Bosnian refugees, who are Algerian refugees, who are old punk rockers, you know, who are all dressed in Harrods security uniforms. And met all sorts of people around me that I would, you know, given my prejudices, would have dismissed as not worth talking to, you know. And the same occurred in Texas. So I think whatever situation we're in, building community is always an option. Non-violent resistance and sustaining that is always an option. And the acts of mercy of picking up our brothers and sisters who've fallen over, those 3 things are all options, whatever tradition we come from.